Employees at an escape room. What was the weirdest thing you witnessed through the cameras? A couple broke up in the room I was running. I then gave them loads of hints so they could get out ASAP. Story 2. I went to a place with my family and while we went into our room, we saw some employees working on fixing another room. Apparently, someone from a group before ours decided the only way out was to shoulder charge the door, which wasn't all that strong and ripped the entire thing out of the frame. I guess they technically succeeded. Story 3. There was a room with a bed in it. Instead of continuing to follow the clues, 2 guests proceeded to put themselves to bed and then take a nap for half the time. They weren't hurting anything, so I let it happen. Before they left, they remade the bed and tucked 2 of our skeletons inside. Story 5. My mother and her friends went to an escape room one night for a girls' night out, and while they were solving the room, one of them elected to just fiddle around with the final lock on the door, which was a 4-digit code, and miraculously unlocked it and walked out. Story 6. I asked an escape room employee this once. Our room had a big metal safe. One guy who played in that room just picked up and carried the safe around the entire time. Story 7. Someone dug through 6 tons of sand on the floor to follow a live electrical cable which she then tried to chew through. Story 8. The story that comes to mind is a group of Swedish construction workers genuinely thought the solution to the puzzle was to lift the door off its hinges. Although a more common experience would be explaining to customers that the games aren't as fun when intoxicated, and then have them complain that the game was way too hard. That stopped when we started adding a histogram of every player's score on the souvenir photos, and their embarrassing times were way longer than the average. Story 9. Was in an escape room with some friends and a bunch of strangers. Premise of the room is that you've been kidnapped by a serial killer and you've got to get yourself out of his basement before he comes back. So it's super creepy and gross. A few clues in, we find a key to a 7-foot tall locker. One of the guys I don't know goes to open it. I'm standing right behind him. He unlocks it and just as he reaches for the handle, the door starts to open from the inside. We were so in the moment, he and I just slammed the damn thing shut and hold it with our combined weight. We're all asking each other what to do and there comes a polite knocking from inside the locker. We're all jumpy as heck, but we finally decide to let whoever is in there out. It was the killer and he was supposed to just jump scare the crap out of everyone and run out of the room. After we all escaped, he told us that had never happened before. He was just standing in the locker trying to figure out what to do. So funny afterwards, but it genuinely scared the crap out of me when it happened. Story 10. Generally nothing too crazy. There was a drunk group that came in and 2 of them spent half the time making out on the floor. No clothes came off and they weren't breaking anything, so I just let them be. Lots of stories about stupid people though. Okay, story time. Okay, so these 2 people came in, they get into the room and start looking about. There's a number of things to find and at least 3 puzzles you can solve at the beginning. If you don't get lucky and guess a code to start with, which happens more than you might think. But they focus on the Minesweeper puzzle. It is the most front and center puzzle, largely because it usually takes a long time to complete. We used to recommend leaving 1 or 2 people to focus on that while the rest explore the room. But it's just a pair of them and they both glue themselves to this piece of paper. It quickly becomes clear that neither of them have played Minesweeper before. I'm able to talk to them through a radio, so I give them the rules and some starting mine locations to help them out, and suggest maybe one of them looks elsewhere in the room. And one of them does for about a minute. Opens up a computer, sees it's password protected, finds a couple locked drawers, and then returns to the paper Minesweeper. They don't check under the desk, lift the computer, feel under the table. They just literally want to stare at this Minesweeper. I give them another 10 minutes, then nudge them again. There's other places to start. Remember the rules of Minesweeper are XYZ. Here's another mine location. Do you have any questions? I worry I might have been a little short with them. Anyway, they went a full hour without getting a single puzzle, despite my best efforts. They left the room frustrated, cranky, and promised to leave a disappointing review. Sorry guys, I tried. Story number 2 is more classical stupidity. One of the puzzles in the room involved pointing a little IR remote at a drawer and hitting the right sequence of numbers. Super cheap setup cobbled together by another college student, but it worked. The drawer had a little hole in it so the IR signal could reach the receiver, and because people are stupid, we had a little sign on the drawer saying, "Do not insert anything in this hole." I also specifically pointed it out at the beginning of every game, making very clear, this is not a trick, putting something in this hole will break the game and you won't be able to finish. With all that, 99% of people seem to get the message to not put anything in the hole. There was only one that I remember with some fondness. It was a larger group of 8 or 9, with a few children. Kids are fine in the room, there's really not much they can break, and parents are usually observant enough to keep them in line, more or less. Still, this was a lesson for me in never taking my eyes off the cameras. This one kid in the group was very rowdy. I suspect he had ADHD, or maybe he was just a hyper 9-year-old, but his mom was doing a decent job of keeping him focused on puzzles, and I wasn't too concerned. Well, eventually the group hits a dead end, and they aren't able to finish the room. But they are able to get through their remote puzzle, which is farther than most groups with kids. Strangely, I think, they leave the location in a bit of a hurry and don't even want pictures. When I reset the room, I see why. The receiver for the remote drawer is cracked and broken. The exposed wires were mangled and managed to cause a short circuit which opened the drawer. And I was kicking myself for not keeping a better eye on the kid. So I rewind the tapes to see when and how this happened. And I see this kid running around and eventually see the again clearly labeled drawer. He grabs the handheld radio and tries to shove the thick plastic antenna into the hole, which is clearly too small. It's at this point his mom notices his attempt and walks over to him. Undeterred, the kid locates a ballpoint pen and sticks that in the hole. It fits, though just barely, and nothing happens. His mother walks over and watches him, just watches, as he leans into it and really shoves his weight into the hole. Crack, click, voila, drawer open. This, I think, is true stupidity. A fully grown adult ignoring both verbal and written instructions and sitting back and just watching their spawn break something with impunity. Story 11. This is not super relevant to the question, but a few years ago I went to an escape room to meet a Tinder date for the first time. He had paid for the session online and told me to get there at 7. He just didn't show up. I ended up completing the escape room with one of the employees there because she felt bad for me and the session was already booked. Story 12. So there was this group of 5 or 6 teenagers in this one room, and at some point when they open a secret door, the lights go out, making it almost pitch black in there. Now the cameras we look through obviously changed to using IR light, and I immediately see 2 of them go in a corner and start making out. So yeah, pretty weird having to see that while their friends, less than 2 meters away, be oblivious to what their friends were wasting their time on. Story 13. The group of guests managed to pull an entire twin bed, mattress, frame and all, through a thin passageway and into the final room through the secret door. They thought it would be part of the puzzle. It was not. Story 13. Bachelorette party came in and booked the Jungle Temple themed room. They were beyond wasted and I'm not sure why we even let them play, but whatever. In the first room is a book with some pictures of fertility idols, which were just little Buddha statues. One of the girls went to the bride-to-be and pointed to Buddha and said, "Look, it's your fiancé," and everyone had a good laugh. Bachelorette stood in the corner and Blair wished it for a few minutes while one of her friends consoled her. 15 minutes into the game, the one who made the joke had enough of it, I guess, and stormed over and whipped her around and yelled, "It's not that serious, get over it." Dude got sucker punched by the sash-wearing tiara-clad Hulk. Straight domed, made a great sound. I look over at the monitor and see them all swirling in a storm of fists. I get up and head over to the phone and call the manager at the front desk and let her know about the fight club happening in the temple. They continue the fight in the hallway outside the room before moving to the sidewalk outside, giving a great show to the next door pizza store visitors. Best part is when they stopped smashing their fists into each other's skulls, they came back asking for a refund since they only used a quarter of the time they paid for. If you're ever looking for a job that generates good stories, look for escape rooms. People are dumb and you get to watch them do it. Story 14. I worked at one, but our game masters were in the room as hosts/actors. As the host of the room, my job was to make sure the guests were on the right track and being safe. As an actor, I also had the job of immersing people in the room's environment. I mapped out a Santa/Christmas themed room where the room host basically acted like Buddy the Elf, and the plot of the room revolved around escaping from Santa's office. There was a key on the Christmas tree taped to a candy cane. The way we hid it, it was one of those things where you didn't see it at first, but once you did, you couldn't unsee it. Some groups found it quickly, while others never did without help. If your group was pleasant but struggling, I usually sang about candy canes until you caught on. If you really weren't getting it, I'd make a show out of gasping for air and singing it in one breath. If your group sucked, mean, obnoxiously drunk, and etc., then you'd get a fun fact about Santa. He can simply glance at any Christmas tree and tell you how many needles there are. I'd then watch the jerks count needles on a pine branch. The highest number counted was somewhere over 300. At that point, they'd ask, "How is this a clue?" I'd say, "Clue? It's just a hobby. Oh look, a candy cane," and start singing about them. Story 14. My cousin went through an escape room with his friends and were solving the puzzles at an alarmingly quick rate. They were told the entire escape process would take anywhere around 60 to 90 minutes. Well, they were finished in 10 minutes. The coordinator running the room was floored and told them this was the quickest she'd ever seen someone escape. Thinking they were cheating, she went into the room. Well, whoever the employee was that cleaned up the escape room before them left the answer key behind. So my cousin and his friends had found the answer key, and it still took them 10 minutes to escape the room. They got a refund and were asked to please try again. Story 15. I don't know if this was one of the weirdest, but my friends and I turned off the escape room. There was a box on the wall with a pinhole in it. In a chest we found a hat. On the hat was a hat pin. The hat pin fit perfectly into the hole in the box. Inside the box was a big red switch. We flipped the switch. Suddenly, every single secret door opened, the lights turned on, the video projector switched from showing spooky words to showing a Windows desktop, and the music and sound effects all stopped playing. It was very confusing. About 2 minutes later, one of the employees came in shaking his head in disbelief. Apparently, we found the kill switch and turned the whole thing off. We had to reset the entire room. This took about 20 minutes. Then we were let back into the room. We only had 5 minutes left on our timer. Miraculously, we completed the room with 34 seconds to go. Management has assured us that the hat pin has been removed from the room as a result of our incident. Story 16. I did one and I'm partially colorblind, and one color I can't see is yellow. Early on, I found and announced the word 8 written on the blinds on the door in white. The last lock was a color/number based lock, matched the colors to the numbers, and a hint told us which ones we should have found, including white and yellow. We had 2 white numbers, one we thought was a clue to something else as it worked. After 10 minutes, we finally shouted out for a hint and they told us where the yellow was. My friend who requested the hint looked and shouted to us who checked the 8 on the door besides me, and it turned out it was just me. We heard him shouting, "For F's sake, how could we forget he's colorblind?" He shouted back to them I was the only one to see it and I cannot see yellow, and we hear them erupting in laughter along with a group doing the one next door. We got out in under 55 minutes. Story 17. I worked at an escape room where the game masters were inside the room with the guests as actors who were in character with the room's theme. We had a zombie room with 2 actors, a doctor and a zombie. The plot of the room was fun. Guests walk in, the doctor would begin a scientific lecture about a virus reanimating that tissue. While this is going on, the zombie, chained to the wall, chain got longer every 5 minutes, is snarling. After like a minute, the doctor would have to tranquilize the zombie as preparation for experimentation. Here, the zombie would attack the doctor. Alarms go off, door self-locks to contain the virus, and we now have an hour to escape or be locked in forever. As the doctor, I would get more and more sick as the hour went by, all while trying to remain studious and terrified at the same time. With about 3 minutes to go, regardless where the guests were with escaping, I'd faint. Usually everyone stopped what they were doing to gawk, waiting for me to pop back up. This was usually where the zombie in the room would go ham and start chasing people around the room. With the commotion, I'd twitch, and they'd scream each time I did because it added to the confusion and chaos. With a minute left, I'd pop up in a backbend and start spider walking at people with an Alka-Seltzer tablet foaming out of my mouth. I actually made someone pee themselves doing this. Story 18. I work as an actor in an escape room. Fun fact, only 6% of escape rooms in the US use actors in the room with participants. And one of our rooms has a prop toilet. You can tell where this is heading. Everyone always thinks it's a great idea to get drunk or high before they go to an escape room. Like this will somehow make you smarter. There were probably 9 participants doing the room, and one of the old guys had to pee so bad, but didn't want to say the safe word to be let out of the room. He thought he was being sneaky and went over to the toilet to take a pee, but even when it doesn't look like it, we're paying attention to the entire room. Luckily, I caught him before he whipped it out and took a piss. He was then escorted out of the room. He then spent the next 10 minutes trying to knock the door in to be let back in. They didn't even solve the room. Story 20. One of my friends works for a mobile escape room, like a double-wide trailer that moves around for various festivals. And he told me that before he started working there, an extended Christian family had arranged a fun outing, and the owner of the business had family-friendly versions that they approved of. I don't recall what the scenario was, But at one point, the family were so heavily divided, one stabbed the other with a pocket knife. My friend told me that he had to cover shifts where the employee who was working that night had to go trial as witness. Thank you so much for watching. If you have stories of your own, please feel free to write them below in the comments so I can make a video on them in the future. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you liked it. I'll see you in the next one.